And we're live. Hey everyone, welcome to another Stripe Dev Chats. My name is Cecil Phillip, and today I have a very special guest. I feel like every show I say I have a very special guest, but I mean it this time. Today I have a very, very special guest. My old friend and coworker, Brian Clark. Brian and I used to work together, so anytime me and him get a chance to go on stream together, it's always a special moment for me. Um, I'm sure at some point in time we're going to talk about work stuff, but right now I just want to say, my friend, it's super happy to see you. Glad you could be here. Really appreciate you making the time to come on and hang out with me today on stream, man.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been too long since we've done a stream together, so I'm excited to be here. And thank you for having me on. And yeah, no, this is good stuff, fun stuff. I'm excited.
Yeah, man. So today on this stream, we're actually going to be talking about security. Actually, for the whole month, we've been talking about like a lot of security related things. And in this particular episode, we're going to talk about Snyk, SNYK. I spelled it right? SNYK.
Yeah, buddy.
And how we could use Snyk to, scan our applications and make sure that, we're as secure as possible as we're publishing, our applications to the cloud or to VMs or wherever it is that you happen to be hosting your stuff. And so I was like, well, who better to ask than my good old buddy here, who actually works at Snyk right now, to come on and talk to us about it. So let's go ahead and have Brian. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself really quick, and let's tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hold on, you fooled me, and I need to let everybody in the audience know. I didn't know we were going to be talking about application security. I thought we were going to talk about coconut water.
Dude, you know what?
You got some?
I don't. I went to the store the other day. Right, I went to the supermarket the other day. Supermarket to remain unnamed, and they raised the price of coconut water by like $2. And I'm like, this is highway robbery, man. Like, what are you doing right now? So now I think what I'm going to do. I'm either going to do one of two things. I'm either going to go to a farmer's market and start, like they always have a guy in a truck with coconuts in the back of his truck. I'm going to go to the truck and get coconut water. I'm either going to do that, or I'm going to and I'm gonna have to climb a tree or something and start cutting my own coconuts, man, because it's getting crazy out here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I hear you. So yeah, I thought we were going to talk about coconut water, but we'll save that for another stream, I guess. Then a little bit about me. I'm Brian Clark. I'm a developer advocate at Snyk. I mostly focus on web development using JavaScript and Node.js technologies, but I've dabbled and have experience in other languages and platforms over my long career. And yeah, I'm excited to be sharing. So my passion, and I call myself like an application security enthusiast, where I don't know everything about it, and there's quite a lot to, and I'm sure there's a small fraction of people that do know like almost everything about application security. But I call myself an enthusiast because I'm a developer at heart, and I have an interest in security related topics and making sure I'm building things in a safe way.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, I just have like that tinkerer type of mindset. Like I want to go beyond the surface of things. Like an example of that, like when the Xbox 360 came out and it had, I don't know I know you're a gamer too, Cecil, so you recall this time. It had like the red ring of death that was called on it, where it would just like not work. And I was like,
that. Yeah.
I've had enough of this. I need to break this thing open. I looked up on some YouTube videos and I just started tinkering with it. That's kind of the mindset I come with. And as a result of that, it led to me wanting to tinker. Like, how do I break my apps? And that's how I got into this area.
That's kind of interesting. Security for me has always been one of those really intimidating topics to talk about. Because every time I think about security, and this could be like, I don't know, call it past trauma, right? Of what security used to mean like to me. I think about like cryptography and hashing algorithms and symmetric encryption and all these types of things. And at the end of the day, all I really want to do is I want to be able to log into stuff, right? I want to make sure that whatever I'm sending over the wire is secure, right? And I also want to make sure that the things that I'm downloading or including inside of my computer, my applications are also safe to use as well, right? So, again, like that kind of just shows like multiple layers of what it means to be secure, right? And what security means to different types of people. And so every time I think about security, I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to go back to college. I'm gonna have to get another degree. Like there's just so much stuff to kind of cover. But I know for you and for Snyk in particular, they cover like a very particular part of security, right? Like they're not username and logins and OAuth and that type of stuff, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about like the space that you kind of occupy, or the space that Snyk occupies when it comes to security?
Yeah, well, one, I want to address what you mentioned, where like security can be kind of daunting and intimidating, scary to developers, and at the end of the day, while we all know it's important as developers, we don't necessarily get measured on that. I know, I'm sure you could speak from experience as well, Cecil. Like
Yeah.
in past roles, when I was just strictly a developer, my performance was measured on like the features I was delivering and how often and that kind of stuff. And it wasn't about whether or not I was checking the boxes of being secure, And so as a developer, while it's important, it's not always necessarily prioritized at companies. And so you want to be conscious of this stuff and cognizant of the things that you need to be thinking about when it comes to building out your apps to be safe and secure, like you said.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want it to get in the way and slow you down, because you're not getting measured on that kind of stuff. So that's where I think Snyk really plays an important part in that whole thing. And I, like, before I even joined Snyk, I was a user of it, in particular their open source Snyk open source product that they have. And it just never got in the way for me. It was always just keeping me alert and aware of the vulnerabilities that are popping up, or becoming aware and disclosed, and then letting me know if I'm impacted by that. So
Got it.
Snyk is a developer security platform. It offers a number of different products and services. Of them, there's Snyk open source, which lets you know about vulnerabilities in your dependencies for many different programming languages and platforms that you're using. There's Snyk code, which lets you know about vulnerabilities in your code. So the first one is like vulnerabilities in the code you depend upon that somebody else probably wrote.
Okay.
Second one is your own code. Then there's Snyk container, which lets you, if you're using containers for your development and hosting and production and that kind of stuff, you want to know about potentially introducing vulnerabilities through that avenue and that vector, if you will. And then there's Snyk infrastructure as code, which is something that's a little bit more outside my wheelhouse. But essentially, like, if one of the biggest things with cloud security is misconfiguration, and that tends to happen when you're setting up that infrastructure via code, using like YAML files and that kind of stuff. So that's a Snyk in a nutshell on the surface, but we can dive deeper into things as we go on here.
I had no idea that the catalog of coverage was so wide when it came to Snyk, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
In my head, I've known, here's what I first learned about Snyk, right? Like prior to you joining there, first time I ever noticed Snyk was, so I'm a big fan of using Docker containers, not only just for like, hosting applications, but for like even local development too. Like I like to run local databases and queuing systems and stuff like that on my machine, because I'm funny with my file system. I don't like people messing around with my file system, so I run them in containers, right? Sure. To get like that, I guess as it's relevant to the conversation, like that isolation of security, that like whatever I'm running is in a box versus just like free reign on my file system, right? So that's why I do that. But going back now, the reason when I first realized Snyk is that when I run containers, at the bottom it'll say like Snyk scan initiated or something like that. I'm like, what is this thing? Like I didn't install Snyk. But it's just something that comes along with, at least with Docker Desktop. Probably not like Docker, like the daemon, but like with Docker Desktop. And I think you'll get that on macOS and Windows. It just automatically comes in the box. And so that's the first time I heard about them. So for me, it was like, oh, okay, well, here's this thing that scans containers, right? But then now you kind of just gave us a whole catalog of stuff that, again, I had absolutely no idea that you did. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and that's pretty common, I would say, because even for me, like my first introduction to Snyk was just their open source product that they have that was letting me know about. Basically, I would set it up for my project, have Snyk monitor my project, and then alert me to any vulnerabilities that pop up in the things that I'm depending upon, the open source packages that I'm depending upon. So it's not uncommon to hear that. And as I joined Snyk, that's when I learned more about all the things that it offered as well. So I'm right there with you. And happy to say that, there's a lot of things that Snyk can help you out with as a developer throughout the entire life cycle that you're worried about when building software, and in your own development workflow too, to make sure that it doesn't get in the way, but it's complementing your workflow.
Okay. So I know you have some stuff to show us, and we're going to switch over to your screen in a second. But first thing, what I wanted to do, or what I should have done when we started, was I do have some links I want to share with folks, just to kind of let everyone know about some of the cool things that are happening in the community. So I'm going to pull up my screen really quickly, and let's go ahead and go through some of these links. All right. So first link I want to show off. So my buddy CJ, some of y'all might know CJ. He's been on the show before, and he has tons of videos on the Stripe Developer YouTube channel. He has this new blog post about a new feature that we just released called "Offer free trials without an upfront payment method using Stripe Checkout." That sounds like a mouthful. Let me tell you what that means. That means that if you have a service that, let's say, it requires a subscription or some type of monthly billing or something like that, or even if you're billed on usage, right? A lot of the times you want to give folks free trials. But then what does that mean? That means that, hey, well, oh, I want to sign up for this cloud provider and they need me to give them my credit card, even though all I really want to do is just kind of go in and look around and see what's happening. Well, with this particular feature, you can design like your payment experience, collect customer information, but not require them to give you any payment details to get started with that free trial. So I think that's really amazing. And I think that also helps companies and businesses with their conversions, right? Because now it's not like, oh no, I gotta.
Links of the day.
You still have that? Are you serious?
I still have it. I was sorry. While you were going through that, I was like, this is the perfect time to do it.
Oh my gosh, nostalgia. I love it. I love it. Links of the day. I love it. Now you threw me off. What are we talking about?
My bad. I was trying to do it where you didn't hear it. But.
That's fine. I hope everyone heard it. I know I could hear it. I hope it popped up on the stream too. Yeah. But anyway, this is a really cool feature. Definitely go ahead and check it out. It's on our Stripe organization that's over on dev.to. Again, another quick post from CJ about handling webhooks from Stripe Connect. I don't know about you, Brian, but like I find like for a lot of developers that work with any type of API that has like deferred execution, like working with webhooks seems to be like a big thing or a hard thing for folks to do. And I know this is not just a Stripe problem. I'm sure folks at Twilio and other places have like the same type of thing as well, of like, what's the best way for me to handle my webhooks and securely validate my webhook signatures and all these types of things. This is a big topic that I know comes over up over and over again. So here my buddy CJ has another blog post over on that Stripe organization over on dev.to to talk about that. So head over there and check it out. And our friends at Snyk, you'd think that I knew you were coming, right? I'm gonna put this in here. But this month, from February 14th to March 14th, there's an event called the Big Fix. And Brian, why don't you talk more about this? Because you're involved in setting a lot of this stuff up, right?
Yeah. So I'm super excited about this because I'm like Cecil, you said, I'm heavily involved in it in a number of different ways. But basically, if you think of Hacktoberfest, like that GitHub and DigitalOcean do back in October, where you contribute to open source and you meet certain criteria, and then you can redeem some swag from the event, right? So it's essentially that, but for security related things. So what we are looking for folks to do is sign up for the Big Fix event, fix at least one vulnerability in your projects. It could be open source, it could be closed source, it could be you can fork up somebody's open source project to your own account and go from there. What are we sharing? Is that you? You're still sharing your screen there. So you can do that kind of thing. It doesn't matter what project really, as long as you fix one vulnerability, and we'll be able to track that. I help build the app that's doing all that kind of stuff, and you can see your score and whatnot. You'll be able to redeem some free swag, the limited edition Big Fix, Snyk's Big Fix 2023 t-shirt, along with other prizes and things like that are going along with the event. So for instance, on February 28th, we're doing a 24-hour live stream where we're having industry experts and folks, and like Paul over at Stripe is going to be joining us to do a presentation. We're going to be helping developers level up their security skills through this event, and throughout it, we're going to have like raffles and prizes and stuff like that. So that's kind of it in a nutshell as well. But you can see on the webpage there, that's where you can go to sign up. And we're showing like there's already a ton of people that have started joining. You can see the total number of fixes we got going on there. All that stuff is yours truly here helped build with another colleague of mine, Micah, that I want to give a shout out to.
Cool. Shout out to Micah.
Yeah.
So then, like you mentioned, so this is happening for an entire month. It's online. It's free to enter, free to sign up, right?
All free.
And folks, regardless of where they are in the world, I'm guessing could just sign up and participate.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, that's cool, man. So folks, if you're interested, again, you have an entire month between now and March 14th, 2023. Make sure you head over to the link snyk.io/events/thebigfix. And we'll have the links also in the show description too. So if folks are interested in checking it out, we'll make sure we have them there for you. And then what I'll do too, through the magic of video, I'll even put the link up on screen so that you should be able to see the link right now at the bottom. And again, head over to that if you want to participate in the big fix. Cool.
Sweet.
Now, speaking of events, one last thing I want to talk about, and not my big face. We can move that down a little bit. But, I was talking to Brian just a little bit before we got on, and we were talking about user groups and local events and stuff like that. And I find like in this post-COVID, I shouldn't say post-COVID, this post-lockdown stay-at-home era, right? And now that we're all back outside and being a little bit more active, we don't talk about user groups and going to meetups as much as we used to. I know some folks do, but I know for a lot of other communities, either their user groups didn't survive, or their code camps didn't survive, or they had to stop doing things, or they've gone completely virtual, right? And I'll be very honest with you, I really miss those in-person interactions, particularly in my local community. And so I just wanted to highlight this one. This one is in Jacksonville, Florida. It's called She Can Code It, and they'll be having their first hybrid meetup for the year, right? So happening next week. So super happy that they'll be able to do this, and super happy that I'll be there speaking, just talking about like, how you can build stuff with Stripe and the cloud and Azure and stuff like that, which is really cool. But I think the most important part there is just that, hey, here we are trying to get folks together, still kind of half virtual, half in person, but still, being able to go out and support the community, I think is important. So if you all have local meetups that might be close to maybe where you live or down the street or whatever the case is, maybe in the next city, definitely go out and support them, because, the dev communities are important. I know I personally give a certain amount of like I want to say like I owe like the dev communities like the jobs that I have had, right? Because I feel like every job that I've had has been because of someone that I met and I knew, and they were able to like verify the work that I could do, more so than any recruiter could do, because recruiters don't really know you. No disrespect to recruiters, but the recruiters don't know you, right? Like your community knows you better than they do, so they can better vouch for you and give you good recommendations and stuff like that. So that's all I got to say about that. I am going to take my screen off now.
Is that it for?
I didn't hear it.
It didn't come through that time?
No, it didn't come through that time. I was waiting for it. I didn't hear it. I heard it the first time. Did not come through that time, but it's all good though.
Oh no! All right, hold on. I gotta fix that real quick. Hold on.
Like you changed the button or something, man. Like what'd you do?
I changed the output. I thought it was the proper output, but apparently not. So now,
links of the day.
There we go. Got it. I love that.
Okay.
I love it, man.
Okay, I'm glad you bring up the whole meetup thing, Cecil, because
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, the first time we ever kind of like came to know like acquaintances, I would say, was at a code camp, right? Do you recall? Potentially,
I think was it Orlando Code Camp?
I think I saw you like speak there or something like that. Was the first time I ever.
Yeah, I think it was Orlando Code Camp. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah. And speaking of Orlando Code Camp, I'm going to this year's version next month, March 2023. I don't remember the date, but sometime in March. So I'll be up in Orlando again for that event too. So looking forward to coming up and hanging out with some folks.
Sweet.
So let's talk about Snyk. Let's actually do what we came here to talk about. let's talk about
what was that again?
Some security thing that like saves people from getting hacked or something like that. Something like that.
Maybe. Yeah.
You want to put on your screen and we could kind of like go through some stuff? Are you there? I think
I'm ready. I'm all set for that.
Yeah. All right, cool. I'm gonna pull your screen up right now and we can see your slides. So let's talk about Snyk a little bit.
Here. Hello? Hear me okay now?
I can hear you. Yeah, you were like a little jittery, but I got you now. I got you. Yeah.
A little jittery. My computer is CPU is 100% being utilized right now for some reason. Okay. Anyway, let's push through this. So yeah, here's the presentation slides that you can see on my screen now. We're going to be talking about building apps securely, if it will let me go through. I'm going to kind of breeze through some of this stuff. So one of the things that we were talking about earlier is like what we all. Oh. Hello?
I can hear you. You're like
Don't do
jittery
this
a little
to
bit,
me
but I can still
now.
hear you.
All right, maybe things will smooth out a little bit here. Hopefully.
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Come on now, technology. All right, so we were talking about application security and how it's important. We all realize that, but we don't necessarily have the aware. Well, one of the things that comes to mind when I think about my career experience and how I got into application security was a lot of times I didn't know about the things that I needed to defend against. Like, what are these vulnerabilities that are out there? I keep hearing about security being important, but like I don't know a lot about this. And we'd have a security team that would just say, "Hey, here's this spreadsheet of these different controls that you have to adhere to, and you check off the boxes and let us know that you're doing so." And I'm like, can we get a little bit more details on this stuff? Like, I didn't know what cross-site
Yeah.
scripting is or cross-site request forgery, or what's the difference between the two. So one of the things that I like to do in this type of presentation is like really demonstrate some of the one show it. So if we have some time, we'll do maybe a demo here, but if not, we do these a lot of times on our live streams over on Snyk Live on Twitch and YouTube as well. But I like to demonstrate that because how can you be expected to protect your applications if you don't know what it is that you need to protect it against, right?
Yeah.
So we know application security is important, but understanding the full depth of it is part of it. So in this example here, like there's 85,000 apps that were tested for security vulnerabilities. Of those, 83% had at least one security flaw, and then 20% of those had one severe vulnerability in it. So just a small sample set, but you see the majority of them, more than the majority, had some issue related to security that it was vulnerable to, whether they realized it or not. So this is where we come into play with talking about this thing called the iceberg. It's this metaphor that I like to use, we like to use in general at the company, but I like to describe it as like it's the iceberg that's not going to sink your ship. It's actually going to keep it afloat. You know, shout out to the Titanic there. But when, in fact, a question for you right now, Cecil, is
Yeah.
when you think about from your career and your experience in development roles, and somebody approached you, maybe it was your project manager, your team lead, whatever it may be, and said, "Hey, Cecil, we need to worry about the security of this application." Where does your mind immediately go of like what you should be worried about?
When I think about security, the first thing I usually think about is either, roles and permissions, login. I think about, connection strings to like either databases or API keys and things of that nature. And then I guess I'd also want to think about, well, what happens when bad things happen? And then let's say, I don't know, we get hacked and I don't know, the hard drives get deleted, right? Like, how can I back up and restore things, assuming like bad things happen, right? So those are some of the things that immediately kind of pops in my head.
Yeah, and I think that's spot on, very, very valid stuff to be thinking about. But what I think at a high level that encompasses is like you're thinking about your code, right? You think about how you're handling your connection strings and that kind of stuff. That's all in your code, and that's totally understandable. And that's like whenever somebody approached me about that topic, that's what I would think about. And so, it's good to start off there. And if let's say this is some sample code that I had in my application, just looking at it yourself, can you see potential vulnerabilities that are in this right now? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but I gave you a little bit of a heads up that this was going to be
potential vulnerabilities. Let's say,
and folks in chat can try and answer too.
Let's see, what could be a vulnerability? Well, I guess one thing that could happen is this looks like I could probably just like spam this method to like guess passwords and usernames and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like I could probably either, do like some kind of, I don't know, like iterating for loop, but I just hit it all the time until I eventually get it. What else could happen?
You got that. I mean, that was kind of what I was looking for.
There was, okay. I wasn't sure if there's more than one. I was like, what else?
There are more things. I'll call them out though. So like right off the bat, what you were talking about is like enumeration attacks, so where somebody can just keep trying and seeing if they get a success response. So it's susceptible to a brute force attack where somebody can be guessing username and passwords, right? There's no rate limiting, which kind of goes to what you're talking about before, in the sense of somebody could just use some scripting tool against this API endpoint, assuming it's an API endpoint from Node syntax that's common there. The password is just being you can tell it's being stored in plain text, right? There's no proper handling of salting and encrypting the password before it's getting stored into the database kind of thing. What else? Input validation to make sure that nobody's trying to do any type of SQL or NoSQL injection, depending on the type of database that's being used here. In this case, it's probably Mongo or a NoSQL based database. So those are some of the things. That's good. You're on top of those things there. It's good to see. But so typically your code might be some of that, but a lot of your code is going to be kind of like this, especially, whether it's a lot of these examples are going to be showing JavaScript and Node.js based examples, but you can apply these to any other programming language and platform that you're using, or ecosystem rather. So in this case, I'm using this library called marked, and then I set up some configuration. It's 3 lines of code if you count the white space, but that's about it. So that's my code, right? And so, yeah, my initial thinking of vulnerabilities and security that I need to be concerned about is there anything that I'm introducing here that's vulnerable? Doesn't look like it to me, right?
Yeah.
Does it look like to you? No. However, those 3 lines of code are actually more than that that's being run in production. That open source library that I'm depending upon there and requiring, marked, has however many lines of code that it's using within itself, and any child dependencies of itself, like that whole tree of dependencies that go down from the source to the finish, So if you think this took us, like, was really eye opening to me, because again, I was always thinking about my own code, and I think open source, well, it's out there in the open, people can vet it. It's getting, folks that are security oriented are reviewing these things and making sure that they're secure, and there's never going to be vulnerabilities in it. That was my naive approach to open source. But
Yeah.
the reality is that's not the case. Like, just because it's out there for everybody to review and see doesn't mean everything's always being caught, for one. But then two, or it does mean things are being caught, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean that the version you're on doesn't have vulnerabilities in it that might be fixed in a newer version, for instance, right? And how do you become aware of that kind of stuff? And
Yeah.
that's what we're going to get into here. But I want to really emphasize, like, the true surface area of your application is much larger than you might think, because it's beyond your own source code that you're writing. So we're getting into talking about different types of open source software attacks. How can this be possible when it's out in the open? Well, there's a couple different types of attacks that are pretty well known and we've seen over the years. There's typo squatting attacks. So in this example, you can have malicious actors that push packages to whatever registry you're using, in this case, the NPM registry, and try to take advantage of people making a typo mistake and accidentally installing the wrong thing instead of the thing that they intended to install, right? So in this case, somebody might have fat fingered an extra E in there to get React to npm install that dependency for their front end framework stuff, and then, unbeknownst to them, they actually installed what seemed like it was the correct thing because everything's working fine, but it actually has some other loaded script in there that's going to do something bad and take advantage of their systems and application that get run in production and their users potentially, right? So that's typo squatting type of attacks. In addition, you have a question there? Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I've seen that before, and I actually feel like I've been victim to that before, because because typos happens to everybody, and I've definitely like installed packages, and I've been like, oh, I made a typo, oh, but it installed anyway, and sometimes like you might have like a CLI command, and you type in your CLI command, and the CLI knows you put in a typo, and it like adjusts to the correct one. It does like this fuzzy matching thing, and it does the same one.
Oh, it does.
Sometimes depending on what CLI you use, whether you're using like, what's that thing called, like ZSH or Fish or whatever the case is, it might do that for you.
Yep.
And so sometimes I do that with like package managers, and then it works. I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe it did it for me, and Cecil must have meant this. He couldn't have meant the other thing, right? And it just kind of installed it.
Yeah, you kind of have to be careful with that stuff, I guess, right? Because if you always use the typo version and it's bad. Another example of this was the not .env, but like the cross-env. There was one, so it's again related to the JavaScript ecosystem, but it was a pretty big issue that came up. It was one that was handling environment variables, and it helped load up environment variables on cross platforms. So whether you're running your app on Windows, Mac OS, Linux, whatever it may be, it's a cross-platform way of loading environment variables into your application for a Node JavaScript-based app. There's cross. I still, even to this day, mistaken. It's either cross -env or just cross env, one word. But people would make the mistake. It was probably, I think the proper one had the hyphen in there, but people would make the mistake and enter in npm install the one without the hyphen, and somebody took advantage of that, and they started exfiltrating, because a lot of times we put, like you were talking about before, connection strings to a database. One of the safer ways to store that stuff is in environment variables, so that it's not hard coded in your source code, for one. And so if somebody has access through an open source package to read those environment variables and exfiltrate them to their own API that's ingesting it, and then they can start using that stuff to their advantage, take over your database, what have you, right? So that's yet another example of this typo squatting type of attack that we see in open source.
That's interesting. And I think another thing that I see with that is I might not be the one that's doing the typo squatting, right? Like it might be the person that's depending on the thing that I'm using that does that with. And so now how can I, like, what can I do about that, right? Because I didn't write the package, right? Like I'm just consuming it, but then maybe like one or two levels underneath that, there might be an issue or error like that shows up. And then now not only is that package affected, but like me and everyone else that's using it is affected as well.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. All right, ready to go move on from here?
Let's go. Let's do it.
All right, another type of potential attack is people just publishing malicious packages to the registry. So in this case, back, I don't know, maybe you played with your family, the Fall Guys game.
We have played Fall Guys, yes.
I love Fall Guys, right? But some, maybe some kids they're learning about programming and they know that they can install different packages and they might go searching for it. And this did happen, I guess. I mean, somebody felt this was something that could potentially work for them that's a malicious actor. They created a package called Fall Guys. And maybe people install that thinking it's going to give them some type of advantage or a hack in the game and they can win every round or whatever it may be. This is just one example, though, where you think you're installing something that's legitimate, but ends up being something that's going to be malicious. In this particular example, what they ended up doing was it had like a Discord webhook, and the code attempted to access specific paths available on a Windows system, such as like your Chrome user local storage database in your browser to get any kind of maybe auth tokens that you might have in there and that kind of stuff. And they were able to pull that out through this type of package that happened here. Pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But it's funny, we never think about it, right? Like we, again, as developers and particularly as folks that are just getting started, like these aren't things we think about. And I think it's also because these aren't things that we're taught naturally, right?
Yeah.
Like when I was learning to code, or when I was learning .NET, or whenever I was learning Python, or whatever the case is, and these are all ecosystems that have package managers to download and consume third-party things.
Right.
No one ever told me, oh, okay, well, look out for typos because typos could get you, DDoSed, or you know what I mean. Like no one ever told me these types of things. But I think too, because we don't really talk about it, we're not in the habit of talking about security, right? And like I guess I was alluding to in the beginning, the thought of security is just like, this is like a really intense subject, right? But I feel like as you're showing me right now, like there's some really simple things that people can do to kind of, freak you out a little bit, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. There's stuff that, again, I wasn't aware of until I started diving deeper into this stuff on my own, just because I had the interest in it, right?
Yeah.
And most developers aren't necessarily going to go that route because their motivation is to deliver and do well in their roles for their jobs that they're working for, right? But we're going to get into some things here that Snyk offers that helps let you focus on that and not have to worry about some things like this. So another situation that can come up in open source is maintainers of the open source projects. They're human beings, but they could potentially get compromised. So in this one particular instance, somebody used social engineering they played the long game in this situation, Cecil. They built up some trust with the maintainers of this package called Event Stream and got access, basically enough trust to where they were contributing, they were active in the community around this package, and the maintainers invited them to have access to start pushing code to the repository. And once they got to doing that, it gave them the keys to be able to start injecting their own malicious code and take advantage of that particular position that they were in having access to. So something else to be thinking about and considering that could to let people know, like, because again, we think I certainly, again, am guilty of this, where I just kind of naively think it's open source, so it's naturally going to be secure, but it's not necessarily the case because of these types of ways that open source can become compromised.
Yeah.
So as a whole, what we're talking about here is supply chain attacks, and like I've been emphasizing throughout this, it's not just, while the examples are in JavaScript and Node.js, it's not just limited to that ecosystem, that programming language. So things are a little bit off here when I converted it to PowerPoint. So cybersecurity, some of the challenges with this that we're realizing, some stats to help back this up, is that on average, the average number of outstanding critical vulnerabilities in an application that was found in the study that we ran was about 5.1 critical vulnerabilities. And when we say that, we're talking about, like, there's certain levels that we categorize, at least, vulnerabilities. There's critical, high, medium, and low in terms of like how impactful that vulnerability can have. How devastating can that vulnerability be on these systems that are susceptible to it? Another stat that came out of this study as well was the average number of dependencies per project that we find, especially, it can range between 25 to 174, but the average is about 80. Probably JavaScript ecosystem doesn't help that number, to be honest, right? Because of
No.
just the nature and culture around that ecosystem. But it gives you an idea, regardless of the ecosystem, it could be pretty high, the number of dependencies projects have. So with that, that could lead to more lines of code that are more susceptible to these types of vulnerabilities that are out there. And then the average number of days for teams to become aware of vulnerabilities and then turn around and fix them, implement the fixes for them, whatever that may be, is over 90 days. So that's 90 days that they're susceptible to whatever vulnerability it may be, depending on the severity level too,
Right.
that they're left out in the open and people can take advantage of that vulnerability, these malicious actors, right? So not to scare, like the idea here is not to scare, but it's to bring awareness to this stuff as developers of how these things are possible, right? Because again, if you
Yeah.
don't know what it is that's going on, how can you be expected to defend against it? All right,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
here's where I normally would go into a demo on like hacking an intentionally vulnerable application. What are you feeling like? I know we want to talk about the big fix, and I really want to help promote that so people can get hands-on experience trying this stuff out themselves. Time-wise, what are you feeling? Like, should we get into this demo, or should I just go through the rest of the presentation kind of thing? What are you feeling?
Well, let's dive into a demo, right? Because I
Okay.
think what I want to see more than anything else is like, so we like, I can think we got a good understanding of like bad things can happen, and here's some of the bad things that could happen. So let's actually
Yeah.
see how like Snyk can actually help us with some of these things. And then while you're doing that too, I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask as you're going along that I think might be relevant.
Sure.
I think the first one for me is so you're showing JavaScript, and I think a lot of your demos and code samples so far inside the slides have been JavaScript focused. But like, what are some of the other languages that Snyk supports?
Oh, we support a bunch of them. So if you go, do I have it open right now? I mean, we support Java and Maven, C#.net, Python and PyPI, just to name a few off the top of the dome
Yeah,
here. But
so
it's
like
a lot
Ruby
of them.
and all those types of things. Right?
I'm not as familiar with all of the ones that we support, but yeah, pretty much
Okay.
if you name it, we support it for the most part. So yeah. Any other questions related to that? I'm happy to answer.
So there was that, and then and I'm guessing too, because you had mentioned a couple products in the beginning. So I'm guessing like there's different things that I can install to plug into the part that I care about. So as an example, there might be like a code part that like I guess plugs into my editor or VS Code or whatever the case is. And then I'm guessing there might be like a Dependabot replacement, because I have issues with Dependabot that we could talk about at another time. But you know, is there like a GitHub workflow, GitHub hooks things that I'm guessing Snyk could plug into and do some scanning on that part as well?
Yeah. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is let's go through the demo and I'll touch upon some of those different avenues where you can basically like I was mentioning earlier, Snyk wants to be out of your way and allow you to continue to do your development workflow, but across the entire software development lifecycle that you might have, from development all the way to deploying to production, there are different ways that Snyk can integrate into that lifecycle that you see fit. You can add as you see fit, kind of thing. Me personally, I'll show you what I use, kind of thing, what I do. So here's this sample application. It's intentionally vulnerable, so just keep that in mind. But let's kind of put our hacker hats on here and try to think about ways that like somebody that's looking to do something bad would figure out or find ways to poke holes in it. So they're looking at this application. It's a to-do list. There's some buttons at the bottom here, maybe an about. But the thing that catches my eye the most as an attacker is anywhere where I can potentially inject my own stuff into here and see what kind of ways I can circumvent any constraints that this application might have. So if I'm exploring this, it's a to-do app. Let me see what its capabilities are. So maybe I want to add a to-do item that says like, let's walk the dog, right? That's cool and everything, and I can delete it if I need to and all that kind of stuff. Maybe going back to switching out of the attacker's perspective, but the developers of this application, they had a requirement. They know that it's other developers or people that are familiar with Markdown syntax, and they want to be able to provide a richer experience for this to-do list. They want to be able to style some of the components that they have or some of the to-do items that they have. So one of the
Yeah.
things they might want to do is maybe bold something like, I really need to brush my teeth today, kind of thing. And I guess it's
Yeah.
a good thing that we're doing this virtually for your sake, Cecil, so you don't have to smell my breath right now. But right,
Uh-oh.
I'm able to bold it using some markdown syntax on that. Or maybe I want to put a link in there, like to Snyk. So I can use the markdown syntax of square brackets for the text of the link, and then what the link URL points to is going to be in the parentheses there. So / snyk.io, right?
Yep.
I hit enter, and then it becomes a clickable link that I can open up, and it goes to the Snyk's
Okay.
website, right? So that's kind of cool. So now switching back to an attacker's perspective, we realize that we can put in these links, right? We realize we can enter in our own text, and there's some ways to style things. So let's start kind of iterating some possible malicious pieces
Things that
of
we can
data
put into
that
the
we can
text
put in here,
box.
right? So one of the more common things that people will try is to see if they can run their own JavaScript and enter it into the context of this. The context that
Yeah.
this code is running within is a browser. It's HTML, CSS, JavaScript, right? So let's see if we can inject our own code via JavaScript and get the browser to execute it. One way we can do that is by entering in this using the script tag. So, and one way to test that is by trying to get it to generate the alert pop-up, which probably isn't very often used anymore, but as an example to like see if this is possible, we enter it that way. So I hit enter, and we can see, okay, it didn't do anything. So that's not necessarily going to work. So they must have, as again, attacker mindset that we're in, they must have some type of input validation that's happening that can have like a bad character list, like a deny character
Right.
list that's in there. Like, let's not have any angle brackets in there or any parentheses inside the user input. So as an attacker, some people, if they're lazy, they're going to stop right there. But most attackers are a little bit more determined than that. And they're going to keep trying. And they're going to think of new creative ways to inject scripts in there. One of the creative ways that they can get into doing this is by taking advantage of the different link protocols that are available. So as an example, let's say that's the test, right? Instead of using HTTP like we did before, or HTTPS, you can actually say, I want to execute JavaScript as this link. And you could say JavaScript alert 1. So this is one avenue to potentially see, all right, if they're going to block these characters from being input into this field, I'm not using those characters. Let's see if this maybe circumvents some of the constraints they have. And now notice something different there.
Yeah.
It's not actually rendering the text that I entered. So something's happening there. And that to me is like my spidey senses are going off as an attacker. I'm like, okay, I might be onto something here, right?
Yeah.
And so I keep iterating over this. So, all right, if that didn't work, I should have copied it so that I don't have to keep typing it out over and over again. There we go. Or hit that enter. All right. So if that didn't work, what if maybe it's looking for this now, right? So maybe the logic inside of this code is saying, all right, if the user input contains JavaScript : right, then just get rid of it and leave the closing parentheses. Like you can see, it's like removing that out. So what if we use the, I'm going to forget it off the top of my head, but like the HTML encoded version of it. This is probably wrong. I think it's like 58, something like that. It's probably wrong. But see if that does anything. No, didn't get anything right there. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. I have the answer to the problem. I'm going to copy it so I don't have to type it out manually myself. We're going to paste in here, and let's talk about what's happening. So we are still using that JavaScript protocol. Well, was I close on that? I think so. No, that's weird. It rendered it that way. So it's ampersand #58 is that semicolon. Then I'm adding another keyword in here that's JavaScript. This is a valid JavaScript keyword. But again, imagine that logic that's happening in the code that says if contains JavaScript : get rid of it, right? But if I add this in there, that doesn't satisfy that condition, and therefore it allows me to bypass that logic. And again, we go alert 1. So do you think this is going to work?
Oh, wow. I think no, this is not going to work.
You don't think it's going to work? All right, let's see. I mean, now I'm seeing a link there that I can click on. How are you feeling? Are you feeling confident in your answer now?
I don't know. I don't think so.
If I click on it, boom.
You hackers are playing with my mind, man. Like, I don't. Oh, wow. Okay.
So we were able to inject that link in there. So now you might be thinking, Brian, like, that's silly. You're just going to hack yourself kind of thing. And like, yeah, you have a point. Like, this is just running on my own machine. And all I'm doing is generating an alert box, right? So it's not doing anything malicious right now. But imagine, this is just the gateway to, you just get your foot in the door as an attacker. And now you can start constructing a more malicious piece of data in there, more JavaScript code that will actually exfiltrate maybe there was a login that's part of this application, and I had some access tokens in my session store that I can read from JavaScript, right? Well, an attacker can take that and send it over to their own API and ingest or exfiltrate. You know what I'm saying? They exfiltrate that data out and have it ingested into an API that they have control over and visibility, and they see that data coming in, and then they can start logging in on somebody's behalf. But you might be thinking, well, how's that going to happen, right? This is, again, it's happening on my own browser. Well, this is in the database now. So maybe these to-do lists are shareable between people, and I socially engineer somebody and say, hey, or there's somebody that I'm working with, and I'm like, listen, I got this to-do item that I don't have time to get to. We're working as a team. Can you handle this one? It's the one that's got the word gotcha in there. Can you go check that one out for me and then take care of it, right? And unbeknownst to that person, behind the scenes, there could be it might bring them to the correct link and open up like a browser task or something like that, whatever it may be. But really behind the scenes, it'll have JavaScript code that's running that'll do all that malicious stuff that we were just talking about. So that what we just showed there is like a demonstration of a cross-site scripting type of attack. Okay,
that's crazy.
Yeah. So, and I really enjoy showing this type of stuff off because it kind of, for me at least, when I see other people, when I first learned and saw people demoing this type of things, that's what made it click for me as a developer, right?
Right.
Regardless of what the terms are, seeing somebody, knowing that somebody's going to try and take any place that I have user input that's coming into my system, my APIs, I need to make sure I am very thoroughly checking that and doing some type of validation or escaping. These are all the different types of ways you can handle dealing with preventing cross-site scripting. So how is this possible though? Like, is it my code that's doing this, or is it open source? And based on where our conversations are going, this vulnerability is possible because of a dependency that I have in my application. So for this particular issue, the reason why we're vulnerable here is because of the marked library. I have installed, again, this is intentionally vulnerable. Let me make it a little bit bigger so that's not an eye chart for people.
Yeah, that looks good.
It's intentionally vulnerable, right? So I'm requiring it here, and then let me search for where I have it, or I'm setting it up, and I just set some options. I did my due diligence too. So here's the real kicker, right? Some open source libraries have security configuration options, but not always on by default, right? So us as developers, when we're vetting these open source libraries, we kind of have to have that mindset of like, okay, let me fully vet this open source library and see what security options it has, maybe what security implications it's aware of that it might introduce into my application, and things that I can turn on to help protect myself. In this case, I did my due diligence and I saw that this marked library does have this option, this configuration option called sanitize, which is something that typically what we saw happening, right? When I injected that script tag, it's sanitizing that. It's looking at that, noticing that it's using malicious characters, and then transforming that data so that it can be used within the context of an HTML view, right? So I went and did that, and yet I'm still vulnerable to a cross-site scripting attack because of this other avenue that I took outside of what's this logic for this security control is trying to accomplish. Okay.
Right.
So so the next thing is, all right, you did all your due diligence, but how do you become aware that this open source library is vulnerable? Well, one, for those that have a keen eye, I'm using the Snyk VS Code extension in my instance of VS Code on my profile, and it's given me this little hint. You see that there? It's like this particular
11 vulnerabilities.
Right. And so this is where, again, I mentioned earlier, these are the ways that I personally use Snyk, but there's a lot of different ways you can incorporate Snyk into helping you out with this. So I use Snyk. I'm signed into the extension, and it scans my application for me via the open source sash that you would see here. It looks at my package dependencies and lists. Of course, this one is intentionally vulnerable. That's why there's like hundreds of them that you see listed here on the side. But in particular, what I can do then is I can hover over this. There's a little light bulb that might be hard to see, and it says, show the most severe vulnerability that Snyk's reporting for this open source library. So when I click on that, it opens up a new tab here, and I'm going to hide the sidebar for a second so we get a little bit more visibility. And this gives me details of at least the highest severity vulnerability that's found in the current version that I'm depending upon for this open source library. And now what's great about this, and I'm particularly excited about with this type of thing, is it gives me information. It doesn't just tell me like, hey, you have a vulnerability and you need to address it. It tells me information about the vulnerability so I can understand it better as a developer and get more educated on this type of stuff. That way, when I move forward throughout my career, I will have the experience of learning about this thing already and be able to proactively look out for this type of stuff, right? So in this case, again, it's describing what we just did, what you saw me do, entering in that to-do item. I was able to inject my own JavaScript code
Right.
because of this cross-site scripting vulnerability. Now, what's important here, maybe you don't have the time to go through this stuff. It tells you right at the top, like, hey, this vulnerability is introduced through the marked library at this particular version, and it's fixed, which is fortunate in this case, by going to the next patch
Version.
version up from there, 0.36. So now that I'm aware and I'm alerted of this as a developer, my next step is to address it. So what I need to do is I need to bump up to that next version that's fixed. There's a number of ways I can go about doing that, but I'm going to pause there to see if you have any questions before I go further.
I really like the approach of helping the developers with education. Because that's what I kind of feel like it is. Like, it's one thing to just say, oh, hey, you have a problem, right? Like, but our tools been doing that for years. But it's another thing to say, hey, here's a problem, here's what it is, here's how you can fix it. But then now there's context that like educates you, like you said, the developer, not only about the issue in your application, but hey, if you see this again, this is probably what it is, or you would have had some familiarity either from that particular library or from that particular CVE, because you're like, oh, okay, these are the things that could possibly happen if we don't fix it. And so now, because you're leading with education, now whenever you go into your code reviews, your design meetings, your sprint planning, whatever the case is, you can say, hey, these are the vulnerabilities that are existing today in our current code base, and here's why it's important for us to fix them, right? And again, like, you're leading with education. So I think it's bigger than just a code fix now. Now it's almost like a culture shift, right? Like, or it's almost like encouraging a culture shift of thinking about security, like, not at the end, which a lot of us are, guilty of doing. I know I'm guilty of doing that.
Oh,
like,
yeah,
we're
for
not
sure.
we're not thinking about security so much so at the end now. We're thinking about it as we go along because we're getting that context like right up front.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And that's why, like, my goal with these types of things and anybody I'm interacting with and talking about this topic with is not to necessarily
Like, scare
uh
people.
not to scare people, but also not to like try and motivate people to become security experts themselves. It's more so to just get in that mindset of like, how can I break my code? Like, how can I
Yeah.
try because we get so focused on I got to build the thing and get it working, which is great. Like that's how I
Mhm.
start with my stuff. I like get it working and then improve upon it, iterate on it after there, right? But if you while you're working on it and building it out, if you think about ways that people can uh break it, right? It's just kind of like QA testing, really, is like, what are the
Yeah.
different things you can throw at this function that you created that's unexpected versus what you are programming it for in terms of what you would expect it to do, right?
Yeah.
So that's just what I'm hoping for is like to shed light and be like, oh, that's an interesting way to think about this stuff to approach it in terms of like, how can I break my application?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, so it's definitely I love that about it. It's educational. You can read up more stuff about this. You can, like you mentioned before, the CVEs. Like these are all like security related terms that are still even like a little bit confusing to me. And this is again why I don't call myself like a security expert. I'm an enthusiast, but it gives you these are like the official written up documentation reports on the vulnerabilities that were disclosed and this kind of stuff. But the key juicy parts to me as a developer is learning down here and then if I wanted to, you can even go down and see more about like, all right, here's where the patch comes into play or when
Oh,
somebody
wow. So
alerted
the
it.
GitHub commit and everything.
Yeah, GitHub PR. Let's click on that for this particular one, right? And what's interesting about this too, right? You can see it's all open source, right? Like again, we maybe naively think these things are just because they're open source, they're just perfectly safe to use all the time, and not necessarily. The other thing to talk about, which is the nature of open source, is maybe the people behind this library are like they're building this on the side. They have a day job, they're programming in another
Yeah.
company, or maybe a job in something else, and they're just doing this as a hobby, kind of for fun.
Mhm.
And they don't always have like a lot of free time to address things in a timely manner. So even when there's a security vulnerability, so an example of this was opened for this PR May of 2015. It didn't actually get merged into that point, the master branch there until 2016. You know what I'm
Like a
saying?
year later. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's where I think some cases, and don't, take this kind of lightly because it's not always the case, but in some cases, Snyk can actually offer up a patch for you in the interim, knowing how to like knowing what the source code alterations need to be to
Yeah.
hold you over until an official version gets released in that library. So like
Got it.
it can open up a PR against your application for you to give you that patch version that they offer. Doesn't happen in all cases. I've seen it like once or twice for my own projects. But that's one of the things that I think is unique about what we offer.
Nice. And so the experience that you've been showing us so far has been inside of Visual Studio. I'm sorry, Visual Studio Code. Does it work in other things? Like, I don't know, is there a Snyk thing for, I don't know, JetBrains and Eclipse and Visual Studio proper? And I don't know, maybe for the Vim users that are still trying to get out, like, is there a thing there for that too?
Yes, I'm glad you bring that up, because just around August or September of last year, we started adopting the folks that work on our IDE extensions. They started adopting that standard that Microsoft came up with, the language, or I don't know if they came up with it potentially. It's the language server protocol. I
Yeah,
think you might be a little
LSP.
bit
Yeah.
familiar. Yeah, the LSP. We
Yeah.
started adopting that protocol so that we can support more different dev tools like Vim and stuff like that. So yes, those pretty much, again, it's one of those situations where you name it and it's either supported or it can be supported now because of our adoption of
Nice.
the language server protocol. Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I thought you were going to ask me, though, with that question of, like, I'm doing everything in Visual Studio Code and I'm using the Snyk extension to alert me about these vulnerabilities. But you might have asked me, like, are there other ways? Well, before we jump into that, actually, I know about this here. I know that I need to upgrade. So what I could potentially do is go into my terminal here and say, npm install marked at 3.6 to fix it, which is perfectly fine. And I push those changes up, and then I can tell Snyk to, like, rescan my application and let me know if that is now addressed, right?
Looks like we got a friend in the house, man.
We have
like,
a familiar friend, Mr.
Shout out really quick to
himself.
Bald Bearded Builder. How you doing, my friend? Haven't seen you in a little bit.
It's good to see
I think
Michael.
the last time I saw him was when you and I were streaming together on your channel, to be honest with you. So it goes to show, man, like, it's been a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, I could go that way, which is perfectly fine. One of my preferred ways for something simple like this, right? Because, and I say it's simple because in the sense of, if in JavaScript and Node and the JavaScript and Node ecosystem, most packages follow semantic versioning, which I know you're familiar with, but maybe folks that are watching aren't familiar with. So it's like there's the major version, which is the first number, the minor version, which is the second number, and then the patch version, which is the last number. And typically, if you're bumping from a version that's minor or below, minor or patch, you can fairly confidently feel that that's going to be backwards compatible. It's not going to be a breaking change. Whereas if it's a major version number change, it might be a breaking change, and you need to do a little bit more more diligence around merging in changes around that, right? You got to do more testing, regression testing, and stuff like that. Regardless, though, you can do that in either way, right? I can either locally install the new version, run my tests, and that kind of stuff. Or what I like to do, especially if it's simple, I like to use the Snyk app. So when you sign up with Snyk and you log into your account, you can sign in with like a Google account. There's lots of social logins you could use, or your GitHub account. I use my GitHub account. You'll be able to import projects. So I've already added this project into my my account, but if you wanted to, you can add more. Let me load this up real quick. Again, all this stuff is acting kind of slowly right now because of my system coming to a crawl of all the things that I have running right now. But you would come up here, choose an add project. You can add a project through our CLI tool, through GitHub directly, or a number of different ways. And it doesn't have to be GitHub. There's all kinds of other platforms and systems we integrate with. So really quick to show that. If you're using GitLab or Azure Repos or Bitbucket as your source control management system, you can hook into those types of things too. But back to that project I was on. This is my particular project that I'm using. We call it the Node.js goof. It's intentionally vulnerable. And I click on, in fact, let me show this so it's a little bit better experience for people to see. These are all my projects I've imported, my personal projects I've imported into Snyk, my personal Snyk account. And I want to look at my open source dependency vulnerabilities that I have in this project. So I click on the package JSON on that. That's where all my dependencies are defined. So in the case of marked, I can search for it in here and I can find the right one. So the cross-site scripting one we were looking at is this particular one, which is also addressed just like the other one we saw in the VS Code information that was being shown to us by bumping up to version 0.36. So another avenue I can take with this is in the browser itself. I can just click fix this vulnerability, and Snyk will, one, prompt me to see if I want to fix any of the other vulnerabilities besides the one I just clicked on. So it's going to show me this list here. I'm going to make sure, I'm going to keep it piecemeal. And this is my word of advice for people, is like slowly but surely implement the fixes, because if you do it all at once and things start breaking, you don't know which one necessarily caused it. So small and steady wins the race in that regard, right?
But then I also love how Snyk categorizes them, right? So like you have low, medium, I'm guessing H stands for low, medium, high. So then now you could look at the information, you could prioritize what you want to fix. And again, because again, you guys are leading with education, right? Like you can kind of look and understand what's happening, and then sprint planning, code reviews, whatever the case is, like pick and choose. Okay, well, this is what we're going to tackle first, or this is the batch of stuff that we're going to deal with first, and then we'll get to the other ones later.
Yeah, exactly. So then I choose which ones, I check off which ones I want to address in this PR, and I say open up a fixed PR. Now, I think sometimes I have issues with my account because it's in like a weird state for some reason, something I did wrong. But being that it's taken a longer time usually indicates that it is working behind the scenes, and it did. Okay, that wasn't bad. So then you could see the PR that the Snyk bot opened up for me, right? It's addressing that particular vulnerability, gives me more information about it again. And if it wasn't a minor change, I could then now check out this branch locally, run my test against it, ensure that it's not going to break anything, and then decide afterwards to merge it, right? But looking at the file changes here, we can see it's just a patch version. So I'm going to say, you know what? Okay, let me merge that in. And one thing before I do that is we want to see the one that we had before, right? It was marked, and it was in particular, it was a high level severity. So in this project, I have currently 49 high. So ideally, when I merge that PR, Snyk will retest my project, and we'll see that number go down as a result of that PR. It should go down by at least one, but maybe more than one, because as we saw, some of them are addressed by the same version bump that we saw earlier. So
Yeah,
let's go ahead and, oh, that's right. Whoops. I'm going to go ahead and merge this.
Right. So kind of like what you said, like, so you're going to merge this. GitHub is going to fire off some webhook, right? And then Snyk's going to pick that up. It's going to be running in the background, right? And at some point, then we're going to get some information that's going to say, okay, we're updated, and like these are the remaining issues that's here. Or if there's any additional ones too, it'll let you know what those are also.
Yep. All right. So let's take a mental note of what's here. There's 2, 49, 44, and 7. So if I refresh the page.
And so about how long do you think that usually takes? Like, is it like instantaneous, or you think we should give it like 2 or 3 minutes? Or
well, we could, because of what you were talking about, where we're using webhooks in the repo, it happens like instantaneously. So you can see it retested on its own automatically once that PR was merged a few seconds ago, which is another reason why I like using this approach, because the other approaches, I might have to come in here and manually click the test button. Like if I just install it locally myself and then push to main, actually, if I push to main, it should pick that up too. So anytime there's changes to the main branch, whatever that you define that as, those webhooks should work. All right. So we see it did go down, went from 48 to 49. And if I go and search for that one, it should be, I mean, there's other cross-site scripting vulnerabilities that introduced from 0.36, so I'd have to go to 3.9, but you get the idea, right? So that's a typical type of flow you can kind of go through to address the vulnerabilities that Snyk alerts you to in your open source dependencies.
That's really cool. And for me, that's a very non-intimidating way to like deal with some of these issues. Because again, I always go back to the fact of, in my head, security is like an intense thing to deal with, right? But in kind of watching you go through this, you know, looking at the issues, being able to like fix it really quickly in Snyk, the integration into like my repository and my CI/CD stuff, just, you know, it kind of makes me put my hands up, and I'm like, okay, great, it's working. Like I'm gonna let the smart people do what they do, right? And then, you know, I'll pick and choose again in terms of priority, and then I'll just have these fixes. But it's not as much work as I thought it was going to be initially.
Yeah. I see Michael in the chat says, I know I'd 100% click fix them all and then try to pick them up, like up the pieces like normal.
I mean, I might do the same thing too, man. I don't blame you there one bit.
Right.
Not one bit. Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know we're running a little bit low on time. I do want you to talk about the big fix now a little bit, if you can. Because I'm guessing some of what you showed us is this what folks do when they join the big fix? Is that what happens?
Yes, pretty much exactly this, right? The idea, so the whole idea behind the big fix is to bring the developer community together to learn more and level up their skills in learning about vulnerabilities and their application security knowledge, right? And you know, honestly, it's also to invite people to get more acquainted with Snyk in a fun, gamified type of way.
Yeah.
So the idea behind it is you would go to the event page, which is again on that link. I think you might have it still there, but if you go to snyk.io/events/the-big-fix, you can click to join the big fix. You enter in your first name, last name, and email, and you'll get an email with a link that will help you log into what we call the Big Fix app, which is something that I've been working on for the past several months with another colleague that I mentioned earlier, Micah, to implement so that we can gamify this whole thing. And as you can see here, it is already happening right now. People are finding and fixing vulnerabilities in their open source projects or their closed source projects, and they're getting on the leaderboard. So this person right here, we assign you an anonymous randomized alias. So this person's called Tense Purple Backdoor, and they're at 39,032 points right now based on how many vulnerabilities they've addressed in their projects, to give you an idea.
Yeah. Wow.
So you get that email, you click the email, it'll bring you over to the Big Fix app. This is what the Big Fix app looks like. You'll see, you won't see this view. Like, I'm already logged in and authorized with my Snyk account. So the email link will get you authenticated into our Big Fix app, and then you need to give us access to your Snyk account. So I already have a Snyk account, but if you don't, you sign up for it. It's also free. All the stuff. I mean, you can look at the pricing plan of things, but like, it's very generous free tier. I use it for my own personal stuff. I don't get like a because I'm an employee, I don't get like a special account on my personal account where I get added capabilities, that kind of thing. I literally just use the free tier, and I've not hit the limits of that at all throughout the entire years that I've been using it. So you can sign up for free and start adding your projects like I did here into your Snyk account. Then when you come over to the Big Fix, there's going to be a button that's right in the middle here that says Connect to Snyk, and that'll bring you over to Authorize. In fact, you know what? Maybe I can just let me do a log out real quick so I can show that at least.
Okay. But I really like this leaderboard idea because I'm like low-key competitive, and I'm just gonna be like, how can I get to the top of this leaderboard? Right? Just to try it out.
Yeah. So you would click either register if you haven't started before, or if you've already registered before. Basically, our login button is this. You type in your email and check your registration that way. So that's what that would look like. Then once you get past that and click the link from your email, you'll see this change from register to start fixing to connect with Snyk. And we have a video that kind of goes through all this right below here too, for folks to get through it. Or if you prefer reading, these directions change that you can step through each step along the way. So once you're like hooked up there, and I probably shouldn't have logged out so that I don't want to like log in on the stream right now. But what would happen is, you saw there was a table after I authorized this app, the Big Fix app, to have access to my Snyk account, because there's two kind of separate entities, even though they're built by us in-house. We'll have access to see your projects in your organization, kind of like what you see here, all my different projects like this. And then you're going to go in the table and check the boxes that you want to use as part of the Big Fix event. So basically, you're saying, I want to use this to help calculate my score and get points for me, because I'm going to focus on those projects and fix the vulnerabilities in those. So in this case, maybe I import this Node.js Goof project into the Big Fix app, and I start addressing those things, right? And that's pretty much it. Like, once you tell us in the Big Fix app by checking the checkbox in the table next to the projects that you want to use, we'll be able to start tracking. We'll keep track of like what the current state of the vulnerability numbers are at. Like, for instance, this one's got 2 high, 48, or 2 critical, 48 high, and so forth. And then once the difference changes in those, as long as those numbers go down, you get points based on the severity of those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, this is awesome, dude. So what happens on March 14th, and I'm on top of the leaderboard? Like, what happens?
Good question. So let's say you're not on top of the leaderboard. As long as you fix one vulnerability in one of your projects, you will be qualified to redeem the free swag that we offer. So
okay, that's cool.
Where is that? You're going to get a free T-shirt from us. So
I want a shirt.
And it's limited edition. We have a new one every year. Basically, this is their second year doing it.
Okay.
So you can start collecting them. I don't even have the one from last year yet, actually.
Oh, yeah. So you gotta find the person with the secret handshake that has like access to the swag vault.
Yes, exactly. So that's the idea. So you do it, it's all free, and you get a free T-shirt as a result out of it. Like I said before, it's like Hacktoberfest, but for security related stuff. But if you're at the top of the leaderboard, to answer your question, you're going to get a VR headset if you're in first by the end of March 14th. If you're in second, you'll get a wireless speaker, and if you're in third, you'll get an Arduino starter kit.
I love it. Okay.
However, that's not the only ways that you can win more free stuff. When we do our 24-hour Big Fix-a-thon, is what we call it, the live stream on February 28th, we're going to be doing raffles and giveaways and stuff like that throughout that event. So be
Nice.
sure to tune into that so that you can, have the chance to win further free stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, dude. So I mean, I'm already signed up and registered, so I'm gonna start like fixing stuff like crazy now, because
All right, do it.
I don't need to be on top, but I need to be close to the top. You know what I mean? For personal validation, of course. I gotta do it. I gotta do it. Yeah,
Fair
this is
enough.
awesome, man. So Brian, thank you so much for coming on, man. This has been awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of what I've seen you show, and like some of the things I know Snyk can do. Particularly that Visual Studio Code extension, for me, I think is going to be like a game changer. Again,
Yeah.
just in terms of like security education. I keep repeating like education, because I think it's only through education that like the hard things seem not so hard anymore, and then we actually make them habit. You know, and I think that's an important thing for us to do for like these types of topics. So for folks that are still here, yeah, definitely appreciate y'all checking us out on the stream today. Make sure you head over to snyk.io, links at the bottom, and then also make sure you check out snyk.io/events/the big fix if you want to participate between now pretty much and March 14th. But until then, this has been another episode of Stripe Dev Tats. Definitely appreciate y'all coming out and hanging out with us. We'll be back again next week with more amazing guests talking about just cool stuff that's happening in the world of development. So that being said, thank you all so much, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for having me.